Let me ask you this, because I know, viewers are always fascinated with something they don't know about. And the prison system is something that people just, they've seen movies, they hear things, but they're so fascinated by it. In 45 years, and this is probably a difficult question, a loaded question, because you saw so much, what was the worst situation you've ever experienced? Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. All is great on this end. And as always, I give all the praise, honor, and glory, and thank you to God for that. I have a very interesting guest today, and I mean that very, very interesting. His name is Mike Thompson. He was once the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood, and he did 45 years in prison for a crime that he maintains that he did not commit. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I want to hear a lot of things. He's a controversial guy, but so am I. We got controversy around us. I'm here. I'm going to have a conversation with him. I'm going to let him speak his piece. We're going to hear what he has to say. For me, anybody that did 45 years in prison and survived and comes out with, his brain intact and his emotion intact, there's something to be said for that. So I want to introduce you to my guest, Mike Thompson. Okay, so Mike, pleasure to have you here. It really is. I've been looking forward to this interview. I know we had a few postponements due to schedules, but here we are. We made it. You're a bit of a controversial figure, as am I, and I know my viewers are going to enjoy this very, very much because of your experience. To have done 45 years in prison in this system and to be out and to be whole in a way, and I'm sure you have a lot on your mind with respect to that, but it's, to me, it's an amazing accomplishment.
Thank you.
And I really mean that.
First and foremost, Michael, it's a pleasure to be here. Insofar as the controversy, and what would life be without it?
All right.
That contention, if you will, and particularly with social media. It seems that everybody has an opinion. And the fact of the matter is, I believe in free speech. If you have an opinion, state it. Problem, I suppose, with that is too often I think what people feel and what they think is a fact. And it doesn't quite work that way. I've heard it referred to in alternative ways. And I understand, that people have their agenda. I don't have a problem with that. As to the controversy, what I basically do is I just tell people, look, do your homework. And if they did just that, I don't think there would be a controversy. And oftentimes I think they would prefer that I do their homework for them. I'm not in a position to do that. I don't even have access to the internet.
Well, you know what? That's not a bad thing, Mike. I got to tell you, I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I've had all sorts of things said about me, and really you sit back and you just laugh. Yes. People that really have no clue, but they're trying to gain some traction, on social media, and they'll say whatever they say, and they try to back it up with non-facts, but just the way it goes, you got to have thick skin to be in this, and I get it. But I'll tell you what's really interesting to me. You did 45 years for a crime you maintain your innocence of.
Yes.
And I have no reason to doubt that.
Thank you.
My dad, Sonny Franzese, received a 50-year prison sentence and did 40 years on that sentence. And I will take it to my grave. My dad was alleged to be a bank robber, mastermind a nationwide string of bank robberies. And I'll take it to my grave that he was innocent. We spoke to every witness. They recanted their testimony. We gave them lie detector tests, proved that they lied at the trial. We could never get the conviction overturned. Right. And what I tell people, and what that shows me, is that this system is not always fair. No. People have an agenda at times for whatever reason that they have. In my experience, I only did 8 years. I visited my father for over 30 and countless other people, so I know the system. A lot of people in prison don't belong there.
We're in agreement. In my particular case, you talk about a polygraph. Now, granted, I was naive. I'd never been in trouble, never been arrested. So
and you were like 20 years old, or?
Yes.
22 years old.
Yeah.
And just so that people know, it was the conviction was of a double murder,
it was double homicide. It was
right.
Two individuals that allegedly were going to kidnap two little girls for ransom. My role in that was to contact the father and let him know that his children were going to be kidnapped. I don't care where you come from. You don't mess with kids.
Right.
That's just the bottom line. But in my case, I made the phone call. Ultimately, when they attempted the kidnap plot, they were both murdered with their own weapons.
Mm-hmm. Both of the perpetrators.
Yeah, the perpetrators of the kidnap of the children.
Mm-hmm.
But I went into, when I was arrested, to be honest with you, I wasn't really that worried about it because I was naive enough to think, having been raised with that Western ethos, that all you had to do was go in and tell the truth. And it does not work like that.
No.
You know, I understand completely when you talk about your father having been convicted of something he didn't do. Too often what happens in our court system is it's a personality contest. It has nothing to do with the facts, it has nothing to do with truth or justice. As far as the prosecution is concerned, in many, many cases, too many cases, the ends justifies the means. Now that's unfortunately particularly true with black people, Mexicans, people of color, they're called. But you also find it amongst the disenfranchised, the poor. You know, those individuals who grew up in abject poverty, for instance. And if they don't have the means available to them, you know, to go up against the system, which has means unlimited, then they're at a real disadvantage. I took a polygraph test. I took 2. I got the highest plus scores in the history of polygraphy at that time, FBI and the Department of Justice.
And they paid no attention to that
No.
because it's not admissible in court.
That's right. But, you know, I took the polygraph tests in order to demonstrate that what I was saying was the truth. You know, not to offer it as the truth, but that I was willing to do that. Should have had some bearing. Unfortunately, it didn't. So in the end, I was convicted of double homicide. I maintained my innocence. I went to prison. And that was an awakening. I'd run the mountains my whole life. I grew up on a reservation and then lived with my elder. He was half Irish, half Nez Perce, and he's actually the one that taught me my ways, to speak my language, dancing, singing, sweat lodge ceremony, and the like. And we traveled throughout the country doing just that, gatherings, and he was very spiritual. So with that, and then coming into a controlled environment like jail or prison, it was daunting, to say the least.
And how old were you when you went in?
22.
22.
Yeah. And
I gotta ask you this.
Yeah.
What I tell people all the time, and they don't quite understand, some of the most powerful people in our system are prosecutors.
Yes.
And the reason being because they can conceal information, they can lie, they can frame somebody, and even when that comes out, nothing happens to them.
That's right.
There's no repercussions whatsoever.
That's
They
right.
have nothing to ever be concerned about. There are so many cases that I've uncovered and researched where prosecutors withheld information,
Yes.
you know, the whole bit. I mean, it runs the gamut. Nothing happens to
That
them.
exculpatory
They're never held
evidence.
accountable.
Oh, I know. And that now, just here recently, a new bill was signed by the governor relative to this very issue. That if a prosecutor is shown to have withheld exculpatory evidence, for instance, that he or she can now be prosecuted.
They can now be
They
prosecuted.
can now be prosecuted in
It's about
California.
time.
Well, it's long overdue.
It's
long
about
overdue.
time.
Prior to that, they had what was called qualified immunity.
Right.
And I'm dealing with a situation right now where I'm facing charges relative to EDD fraud. And while there's no truth to it, that fact has actually become irrelevant. It's the politics associated with that. So I have a chief investigator, for instance, in this case, who has gone to witnesses and said, don't get involved in this case. Now, if I did that, what would happen? You see?
Be in trouble.
You bet I would. And that's what I'm talking about. It's accountability. And, you know, that's really what I'm looking for as it relates to this case. I don't like the politics. I don't like to have to jump through all the hoops that I am, but I'm willing to do that just to shed some light on what's happening. You know, it's not just in this state. This is nationwide.
Mike, let me ask you this, because this is something that I've gotten some backlash from some people, but I want to ask your opinion on it. I don't think, my dad was a member of organized crime, obviously, Cosa Nostra. I was also. And so on the street, we were criminals, no doubt about it. We were engaging in illegal activities. But I have maintained this. I've said it time and time again. I'll say it now, and I'll take it again to my grave. The government, law enforcement, prosecutors, never have an excuse to break the law in order to get the lawbreakers. Because if you allow them to do that, then they can do it against anybody, and they have.
Yes.
And what I tell people is they have enough weapons, enough laws in their favor, enough money, that if a criminal is out there, go and get them the right way, investigate them properly. And if you can't, then our system of justice says if you can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a person is guilty, then he must go free.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of controversy during the O.J. Simpson trial. I've maintained this. Listen, if the government didn't prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, I don't care that he was guilty. He should be freed, because that's the protection for all of us. And I just, you know, having gone through the system and you know, having had your issues, what do you feel about that?
Well, I hear what you're saying, and when you render it all down, what you're really talking about is that law enforcement in general has a license to break the law. And they use that license, unfortunately. Now, I'm not suggesting that all law enforcement is corrupt.
No, of course
That's
not.
absurd.
Of course
I know some people in law enforcement that are stand-up individuals.
And just so you know, I have many friends in law enforcement
I do
today,
too, yeah.
and they wouldn't tolerate
No.
the behavior of some that break the law.
Yeah.
They're against it.
Yes, you know, but it's that license, you know, that unfortunately invades the thinking of the individuals who hold that license, and they abuse it. You know, that idea of absolute power, you know, corrupts absolutely.
That's right.
And I believe that. And so what's required, in my opinion, is a check and balance upon that. And how do you facilitate that? You know, I hear people say, well, you know, you do that at the voting polls, you know, who you vote into office. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. Particularly when you have individuals who are being elected into office who are coming into a corrupt system. And it's really a choice. You know, there are no answers in this, there are only choices. And I think that's true no matter what we're talking about. But I have a real passion, if you will, for shedding light on these very issues, and you know how we address this as a public, not just here in California, but here in the United States. You know what it is. What are our ethics? You know, what code do we function by? When we put a code of ethics in place relative to law enforcement, and they don't abide by that, then what's the remedy? If they're receiving qualified immunity, then where's the value?
They're not accountable. You're right.
You see, and that's the problem. And they say, well, we need this. It's like the measures they take, again, you know, the ends justify the means. The measures they take to bring about the prosecution of somebody toward conviction, you know, without any consideration towards exculpatory evidence or actually suppressing that exculpatory evidence, is criminal. And it should be treated as criminal and prosecuted accordingly. And I think that's the only thing that's going to place a dampener on what we're facing now as a society. Because, in my opinion, the corruption is rampant. And we need to address it as a society. You know, not just these little pockets of activism,
Agreed.
as it's you know so often known. So we have a forum, if you will, a bully pulpit even, as it relates to programs like this. And I'm bringing up my own program I mentioned to you, to do essentially the same thing. It's not to take issue with government for the sake of taking issue with government. So many issues, you know, racism. I'm accused of being a white supremacist because I was a member of the Aryan Brotherhood. I was one of its leaders. You see, there's not a racist bone in my body, never has been. Nonetheless, they hear Aryan Brotherhood and they make that association. I can't fault them for that.
Well, I want you to explain that, but before we do that, I want to make it clear to all our viewers what Mike and I believe, and I think, I know you all have 15 minutes, but I can see that you're very knowledgeable and very well learned, and that's impressive, having spent all that time in prison, because I know many people that that come out of there not in the same condition as you. So it's impressive. But I want to make this very clear. We're not against law enforcement, and we're not saying there shouldn't be law enforcement. We're not anti-government. As a matter of fact, we're both patriotic. We love this country. But what we are saying, those that engage in behavior, those in government or in law enforcement that engage in behavior that is actually illegal, they should be held accountable. Because if they do it against the criminals, they're going to do it against the people that are not criminals. You give the government an inch, they're going to take a yard, and they never give it back. So what we're saying is they should be held accountable to their actions when they themselves engage in behavior that is not legal. So I want to make that clear. But Mike, very interesting. I don't know if people really understand what the Aryan Brotherhood is. And maybe you can explain that, because we have we think of neo-Nazis and everything else and white supremacists. So
and I think appropriately so, because if you look at the Aryan Brotherhood today, particularly nationally, you know, they are the epitome of white supremacy, of a hate group, if you will.
Right.
And so, you know, it's warranted to look at them in that light, and they should be looked at in that light. I'm talking about when I first became a member back in the 70s, that wasn't the issue. You know, you had Old Folsom and San Quentin, and I ended up first in Old Folsom, and you know, you had the...
And that's a tough spot.
It is a tough spot. It's one of the toughest.
Yeah.
And so I was there with the leadership of the Black Guerrilla family, the Black Panthers, the Mexican Mafia, the Texas Syndicate, you know, and then of course the Aryan Brotherhood. You know, I was initially recruited by the Black Panthers. Declined that, then I was recruited by the Aryan Brotherhood, and I declined that. But it was only when 4 Native Americans approached me and they said, look, brother, we know you're an old res dog. We live better in here than we ever did on the res. Now that resonated with me. Mm. So what we were really talking about was control of our resources. Simply that. You have a population of 3,000 to 5,000 individuals. It's like a small city. So you have numerous resources, not the least of which. So I actually became a member of the Aryan Brotherhood in order to control my environment.
Why did you choose the Brotherhood?
I think because 4 Native Americans who were members of the Aryan Brotherhood approached me and told me that they lived better inside the joint than they ever did on the res. Mm. And I grew up on the res. And dirt floors, abject poverty. I slept underneath a travel trailer for the first 12 years of my life, practically. I mean, I was on and off the res. I want to make that clear. But I was what they call a res dog.
So they were Native Americans that were recruiting you into
Yes.
the Brotherhood.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be a white.
No, you had Native Americans, you had Samoans, you had Hawaiians, even Mexicans. What you didn't have is you didn't have blacks. Mm-hmm. And the reason that you didn't is because the blacks wouldn't allow it. You see, the Black Guerrilla family was all black, African American. Black Panthers, not so much. The leader that approached me with the Black Panthers was Hugo Yogi Pinell, and he was their field marshal. And he'd been with the Black Panthers since 1970. He saw the potential in utilizing me, I think, within the system itself, not as it related to their resources, but solely because of my physical prowess. You know, I'd been trained in martial arts. I'd been in a number of altercations prior to arriving at Old Folsom. And the inmate grapevine, the prisoner grapevine, preceded my arrival there.
Right.
So that was the motive behind recruiting me, was that they would have another warrior to do battle on their behalf toward their control of the resources within that environment. Now that's what the Aryan Brotherhood was doing, that's what the Mexican Mafia was doing. So they were moving product. With the Mexican Mafia, it was black tar heroin. You see, with the whites, of course, and the Hells Angels, who were associated with the Aryan Brotherhood.
Let me ask you, guards look the other way most of the time?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I had a locker built into my cell where I kept alcohol, so that when I was paid a visit by the warden or the captain or other guards, I was able to offer them a drink. Many of the guards back then, ex-Vietnam vets, good men, but were essentially lost when they returned to this country at the end of the Vietnam War. And many of them looked for jobs within corrections and found it. Those same individuals were also members of the Aryan Brotherhood. And if they happened to be African American, black, then they were members of the Black Guerrilla family or the Black Panthers, and so on. If they were Mexican, then they were members of
Mexican Mafia.
That's right. And that's how it worked.
Let me ask you this. What was the, maybe you can explain the ideology of the Aryan Brotherhood back then?
I think control of the environment. You know, when you get into an ideology now, they basically, you know, they had Friedrich Nietzsche and they had Machiavelli by way of literature available to them. Yes.
Interesting.
You know, the Prince, of course.
Yeah.
And anybody that's going to engage in politics, whether it be in prison or out here on the street, is going to read Machiavelli.
Well, I'll tell you, being a member of Cosa Nostra, it was almost required reading to read The Prince in there. And that's when I read it and realized that was our ideology.
Yes.
No doubt.
Yeah, you get that. So you get the Übermensch as it relates to Nietzsche. You know, and the irony, I suppose, in that is that, in my opinion, Nietzsche was a worm of a man. He had this amazing philosophy as it related to the Übermensch, for instance, you know, the Superman, but he himself was a worm. I mean, he had nothing going for him, you know, as it relates to whether that be a code of ethics associated with being a warrior or anything else. And so he was unable to exemplify the very thing that he was espousing as being the Superman. That doesn't hold well with me. If I'm going to embrace, by way of emulation or otherwise, someone's ideology, then I want them to at least abide and live by that themselves and set that example so that I know that what I'm emulating is authentic. And that was not the case with Friedrich Nietzsche. You can get into other individuals. You can say that about Machiavelli. And so, you know, I agree with what you're saying there as insofar as your organization adopting that by way of ideology. It makes perfect sense, particularly from a business standpoint. You know, that idea of being ruthless. Because in business, particularly within organized crime, you have to be ruthless. It's required. And the same holds true within a prison environment. So you have that because you have politics like any place else. You have individuals who are attempting to usurp your power base. Your power base, of course, is the economy that you're able to generate relative to that power base.
Let me ask you this. It's a group that at least people perceive it to be anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Well, it isn't. Well, it may be now, you know, and so I can't address it as it relates to now. That would be disingenuous on my part.
But back then?
But back then, no. I mean, its primary leader back then was T.D. Bingham, and T.D.'s Jewish.
Jewish.
You know, one of the first things I noticed on him was a big old Star of David tattooed on him. He actually saw me looking at it and said, "I'm Jewish, but I'm not a practicing Jew, but I'm proud of it." And he was. And there was no reason for him not to be. In this day and age, relative to the anti-Semitic characteristic, I think it applies tenfold. You know, that also applies to, I think, any hate group that exists in this country today, whether it's white supremacy or some form of militant group. You know, we talk about ideology. You know, hate seems to be the primary goal on the part of those groups by way of how they motivate themselves. You know, I have a gathering coming up with African American National Rifle Association in Burbank, and I'm going to do a workshop with them. And the thing that they're primarily interested in is the hate that's generated towards them. Not necessarily racism, but the hate, and where that hate comes from. I mean, we have obviously a history of racism in this country, and it still prevails, unfortunately. You know, we hear a lot of talk about oh, we've come a long way relative to racism, but we really haven't. Fortunately, I'm not a black man that's facing the charges that I'm facing today, because if I were, I'd have 3 strikes against me already. 1, the fact that I'm black. 2, the fact that I come from a disenfranchised community, you see, and that I probably grew up in poverty or abject poverty of some kind, and the only resources available to me were moving drugs, working in prostitution, whatever it may be. So, you know, that's essentially 3 strikes against me, if that were the case.
Yeah, you know, I understand that, Mike, and I think racism obviously exists in our country, but, you know, I have to go back to the fact that today, from the top, from our government, that's all we hear is racism. I think they're fueling,
I agree.
hatred and racism in this country by talking about it all the time. Everything is racist. I heard the wife of some prominent guy said that swimming is now racist, because blacks don't have an opportunity to swim, or they don't have availability of pools to swim in. I mean, they're taking it way too far. I mean, it's and you know, people think about this. They're uneducated, they're ignorant. I don't mean that in a demeaning way. They just don't know. And all of a sudden, everything becomes racist, everything. And I think they're fueling it from the top. There's got to be a better way to handle it.
Well, I would agree with you. They do feed it.
Yeah.
You know, but it's the motive behind feeding it that I'm really interested in. See, if it's because they're interested in maintaining their power base, and I think it is.
Absolutely.
You see, then we have an issue. And how do we approach that? Unfortunately, at the root of all that we're talking about are economics. That's what it comes down to.
Absolutely.
And that's the power base that we're confronted with. So really, it's about privilege. See, and where does that privilege come from? It comes primarily from that patriarchal, white man type society. You know, I'm certain, I know other people that would express that far more eloquently than I am, but that's the bottom line. It's not that I'm against patriarchy. That isn't the issue. But look what we're facing by way of just human rights in this country. The mere fact that we have to put on the ballot equal rights for women. Are you serious?
Exactly.
You know, and it's not that long ago that blacks were just given the vote, or women for that matter.
I agree with that. Let me ask you this. You get recruited by the Aryan Brotherhood, and then at some point in time, you become a leader.
I do.
How did that happen?
It takes about a year. It was nothing more than just my ability to fight. I mean, that's really the bottom line. It would be one thing to say, well, you know, I had this extraordinary business sense. That wasn't it at all. I couldn't read or write. And so I had to first teach myself to read and write. But it was my ability to fight is really what it came down to.
It's amazing how different both systems are, the federal and the state, especially here in California. I know it's a rough state system here in California. I know a lot of guys that have gone through it, and just to survive that amount of time it's pretty impressive. I'll say that. Let me ask you this, because I know, viewers are always fascinated with something they don't know about. And the prison system is something that people just, they've seen movies, they hear things, but they're so fascinated by it. In 45 years, and this is probably a difficult question, a loaded question, because you saw so much, what was the worst situation you've ever experienced? If you can get one, there's probably more than one, but
there actually are a number. I mean, to see life taken impacts upon you. And I've seen a lot of bloodshed, a lot of murder. So you want to remember that when I came into prison, violence was currency. And a life could be taken for a pack of Leemax, a pack of Camels, tailor-mades. And that's pretty cheap.
You know what I've always said, Mike, with people, whether a person is innocent or guilty, the penalty is going to prison. It's being in prison. You don't have to punish them further when they're in there. That's the punishment, being in prison. And so there's got to be some humaneness about it. I guess maybe because we went through the system, we feel that way. But I spoke in front of the Senate staff, 9/11, and they talked about prison reform and all that. And I told a couple of senators, I said, look, do you care about your constituents? Well, yeah, of course we do. Well, then why would you send a person to prison, not rehabilitate them, have them come out in the street when they're around other inmates that haven't been rehabilitated, have them come out on the street and expect them to be productive citizens? It makes no sense.
It's absolutely illogical.
It's illogical.
You see, it is.
And they, whether they get it or not, they really don't care.
I agree.
That's the problem.
That is the problem, is that they don't care. Unfortunately, it's perhaps a poor analogy, but it's like cancer. You see, until someone close to us, dear to us, a loved one, is inflicted with cancer, we don't think about it. But when that happens, suddenly we're researching cancer and how we can help this loved one and so on. And incarceration is like that. Unless a loved one is incarcerated or is somehow in trouble with the law, we don't think about it. You see, because we think, well, law enforcement will handle that. And unfortunately, it's that license that has created the problem. You see, they've been given carte blanche. And it's only in recent decades that we've seen anything done about it, but certainly not enough.
So you believe in rehabilitation inside, obviously.
I do, absolutely. Yeah, I use myself as an example. It's one thing to say that I'm innocent, I didn't commit this crime, but when I went into prison, I joined a gang. And I was involved in activities that I regret. People have asked me before, do you regret anything? And I've always responded, no, but I do regret that. I regret the fact that I put myself in a position where I was so violent that I was shot 22 times. That's my choice, nobody else's. There came a point in time when I had to redeem myself relative to my own character, my own code of conduct, my own values. And I set about to do that. Now the blessing in that is that I am married to a marvelous woman who has been supportive of me for decades now.
We share that.
Yes.
I have the same. If it wasn't for mine, I'd be dead or in prison for the rest of my life.
Okay, so you and me both.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. Therein lies my true power base. You see, that ability to receive instruction, direction, encouragement, and to be loved.
Well, let me ask you, this transition, and you obviously have undergone one, did it happen in prison or did it happen, I know you got out in 2019, right?
Yeah.
So it's not too long ago.
No.
Did you start to make this transition while you were in prison?
I did. I had attempted to make it. I was faced with two truths, what I call two truths, Michael. And that was the life that I was living and the idea that the organization that I was one of the leaders of was going to start taking innocent life. And I couldn't accept that. So I had to make a choice. I made the choice to step away. But because I was responsible for building that organization, giving it an infrastructure as it relates to organized crime, I felt a responsibility to contend with that so that what they were planning would not continue, that they would not continue to victimize innocent people, to kill children, to kill women, to kill elders.
And that's what the group was engaging in.
That's what they were engaged in. And I couldn't condone that, would not condone that. So I stepped away and I began cooperating with law enforcement. But I didn't cooperate with law enforcement with the idea that I wanted something or that I wanted a reduction in sentence. I did an additional 38 years after I began cooperating with law enforcement. There was no 30 pieces of silver there. You see, I did what I thought was the right thing to do. So that process began. The problem is that I didn't really have the intellectual and emotional fortitude to facilitate that by myself. The blessing is that when I met my wife, not too long after I stepped away.
So just to clarify,
Yeah.
you met your wife while you were in prison?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she's been with me almost 20 years now. And she's the one who essentially said to me, this is what I see, and you have a choice to make. Because we were just friends. But she said, if you want to be my friend, then this is what I need you to hear. And,
We have that in common too.
and it floored me. It did. She said, choose. And she put it to me one day in the visiting room, just like that. Choose. You know, however you choose, fine. But you won't be with me. And I said, okay. And I made my choice.
Mine was a little bit different because I have maintained this, and I think you're going to agree. I don't know any family of any member of the mafia that hasn't been devastated, including my own, and not my wife and kids, but my mother, 33 years without a husband. Sister dies of an overdose of drugs. Brother, a drug addict, 25 years, eventually became an informant, turned against my father, put my father back in prison once he was out. He testified against him. Son testifying against the father.
Yeah.
A younger sister, 41 years old, died of cancer early. She wasn't mentally stable. And every family of every member of that life I know, similar situations. So when I married my wife, when I met her and I fell in love with her, I said, how am I going to bring this young girl, she's 20 years old, how am I going to bring this girl into that situation? Because I was such a target. It's only a matter of time before I either go to jail or I get killed. In our family, we had 3 wars. We were a very warring family. A lot of guys got killed. I said, so it's going to be one or the other. Why am I going to take her into this? So in different ways, your wife, you know, had you make a choice, and
Yes.
thank God for that. And mine, it was kind of my choice, but if she was a little bit more knowledgeable, she would have given me the same choice as yours did, I'm sure.
Well,
It was one way or the other.
The term I use is she pulled my covers. She really did. And, you know, the fact that she's worked in mitigation for the last couple of decades, you know, she works with death row prisoners and their families, and so she's no pilgrim. I mean, she knows the ins and outs of prison. She goes into prisons. I mean, she's gone into cages on death row with individuals that I wouldn't go in a cage with. I mean, that's just the truth of it.
Yeah.
But the main thing is that I respect her, I admire her, and I love her. You see, it's that authenticity that I'd never had, you know, in a relationship. You know, the truth of the matter is I'd never had a relationship until I met her. So I come from a matriarchal society culturally, and but I was raised by men, and that was the difference. So emotionally, I didn't have that intelligence. Fortunately, she had the patience, and it took extraordinary patience, believe me, to guide me through the development of my own emotional intelligence.
I could just imagine what a process that was.
Well, essentially what she was dealing with was a thug. That's the bottom line. You know, I addressed everything physically. You know, I was so stoic in my emotion that I suppressed it completely. So she was assigned, she was working on a death penalty case against the Aryan Brotherhood. There was a RICO prosecution, and the ATF and the feds had tried to get me to testify in that, and I told them no, I will not. And they said, well, okay, then we can still consider you on our side. I said, no, you can't. I'm my own man. You know, I've never gone into court for the prosecution or the defense. I go in as a witness. I tell my truth, whatever that may be, and that's it. You know, I'm not there to persuade the jury that this man is guilty or otherwise.
I understand that because today a lot of the warriors, social media warriors, are labeling people as a rat and this and that, and they don't understand. They don't know the system. They don't understand it, and you know, I've always said this: until you walk in somebody's shoes, don't pass judgment, because most of the people that make these allegations, or if they were faced for 1 second with something that would jeopardize them, it would be a whole different story.
Michael, you know as well as I do that within organized crime particularly, that the idea of an informant or a rat is frowned upon. In other words, those organizations put that information out there. It's brainwashing relative to that, so that individuals will not give up the game.
Exactly.
That's what it's about. You see, now you can say, well, that's disloyal. Well, it depends on where your loyalties lie as a human being, and you have that decision to make. For those individuals that received something for what they did, that's not for me to judge. As it relates to myself and only myself, I know that I wanted to do what I did and continue to do because I believed it was the right thing to do. Now, where my wife is concerned, she was sent to me because I had testified in other cases. She had a client in the RICO prosecution of the Aryan Brotherhood. He was an Aryan Brotherhood member. He sent her to see me to get me to recant my testimony. So she did due diligence. She did her job. She came to the prison where I was at. I was in the hole. And they brought me out and we sat down and she told me why she was there and we talked for about 15 minutes about her client and I said, under no circumstances am I going to recant. And I explained to her the same thing I just explained to you. I'm not a witness for the prosecution or to the defense. Feel free to call me. But with that are consequences. You may not like what I have to say because I'm going to tell the truth. But that was the beginning of our friendship.
So that was way back when.
Yes.
It was a long time ago.
Yes.
Right.
But that's how I met her. And
so you actually, whenever it was that you testified, you actually did another 38 years in prison.
Yes.
So there was no bonus for anything that you did. It was.
Actually, Michael, my life became much, much worse because now.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Well, now I'm dealing with a corrupt administration. You see, now they're afraid that because I was dealing with them when I was the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood, that I'm going to give them up. And I really had no intention of doing that. That's none of my damn business. That's not why I was doing what I was doing. I did not want to see children and women and elders executed, assassinated. That was my sole goal. But now I have administrators sending shooters at me, torpedoes, guards, to take me within 1 inch of my life, and they did. They'd get me chained up and they would beat me within just that hair. The only thing that actually saved me, I was choking on my own blood as they were beating me, and I spit it at them and told them, that's all you got? No, I don't know where the hell that come from. It was nothing but bravado, nothing but, because they had me. But the fact of the matter is they stopped. Why they stopped, I don't know. You see, but my life became far more difficult as a result of stepping away from the brand than I ever could have imagined because of the corruption. They wanted me to go into court and testify a certain way, and I told them no, I will not do that. You see, I spent that night, at this particular case I'm talking about, locked up in a cell with a bunch of other prisoners fighting for my life. But that was the setup, because I had not done what they wanted me to do. And I've encountered that numerous times. I've been set up many times in that capacity.
How much whole time did you do?
30 years.
How many?
30 years.
30 years in the hole?
Yeah.
I did almost 3. And
it's a long time.
It was enough for me.
Well, I say it, and I'll say it again. Whether it's 1 day or 30 years, it's the same.
Yeah.
Because it impacts upon you the same way. It's an attempt to dehumanize you and to deprive you, when I say dehumanize you, of your humanity. And unfortunately for a lot of individuals, it does just that.
Yeah.
It strips them of their humanity.
To a lesser degree, Mike, because spending, in the federal system, I spent exactly, we count the days and the hours, 29 months and 7 days. And I saw a lot of guys, again, without even repeating it, just did not do well.
No.
Not do well in that.
They don't. It takes a strong mind, Michael.
It does. It does. And for me, it was all about my faith.
Yes.
I jumped into my faith, and obviously I wanted to get home to my wife and kids.
Yes.
But I have told the system for young people, I'm dead set against solitary confinement.
Yes.
Because it'll destroy them.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that you come out here and we can have a very intelligent conversation after spending that time, I applaud that. I mean that.
Thank you.
It's not easy. Not easy at all.
Well, you know that firsthand. See, that's not something that you have to imagine because you've lived it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. I wish you had not. But the fact of the matter is we both have. And so we bring that body of experience to the dialogue that we're having right now. And I think it has value. by way of educating the public.
Yes.
You see, about that very thing, because it is inhumane. You know, to put an individual not just in a cage, but solitary, as you know, is something entirely different.
Yes.
All you have is a hole in the floor. That's it.
That's it.
And it's called bedrock.
Yep.
For that reason. But, you know, there are a number of ways that we could go here relative to, you know, how do we discuss that? You know, how do we come to some kind of resolution? Because I'm a great believer in let's provide a solution. What is the solution as it relates to that? I think talking about it first and foremost so that people begin to understand, you know, just exactly what it is. You know, it's nothing nice. Nothing nice at all. And, you know, it was my spirituality, like your faith, that carried me through. You know, I can remember taking the shells of fruit and drying it in the air vent and then waiting for seeds from another fruit and then sewing that together to make myself a rattle so that I could sing my songs. That kept me grounded. You see, literally grounded in the mother. You see, the opportunity to sing my songs, to pray. You see, and to know the value of that regardless of where I was at. Had extraordinary value. So it's that connection and making that connection that becomes important. That's why I believe so strongly in providing that to individuals who are incarcerated, the opportunity to attend church or synagogue, whatever it may be.
I agree. You know, Mike, the problem with that is I've experienced this, and the rate of recidivism, as you probably know, could be as high as 60 to 70%, especially in the state prisons. A little even more, a little
It was
more
100%
than in the
here at
feds.
one time.
100%.
Yeah.
I can understand that. But when they introduced the faith-based program, Christian program,
Yes.
where men were discipled inside and then discipled again when they were outside, the recidivism rate went down to 5%. Fact.
Yes.
And yet the system wasn't they didn't welcome this with open arms.
No.
How do you figure
Well,
that out?
what they did, unfortunately, was they recognized freedom of religion as it relates to that, even to an incarcerated individual. So by law, by the Constitution, they were allowed to provide those programs. But there was no essence to it, none whatsoever. It isn't to say that those individuals who came in to minister to the prisoners were not sincere. They were.
Yeah.
But they were overwhelmed, absolutely overwhelmed. They did not have the resources, and by my estimation, still do not have the resources to provide a ministry to individuals who are legitimately seeking that.
Well, I'll tell you this. I was in Angola prison a few times. I went in and spoke to the inmates. Every one of them was doing life.
Yeah.
Life without parole, most of them. But those that were in that discipleship program, I've never witnessed such peace among men incarcerated as I had with them. It was so impressive to me.
Yeah, the real issue that we're talking about here, and it oftentimes becomes an elephant in the room, is love. You see, that's what we're talking about. Love of God, love of country, love of family. It's love.
Yeah.
But also love of self. See, and that isn't discussed enough, unfortunately. And it needs to be. You know, myself included, you know, we adhere to this, what's oftentimes referred to as toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And it's
Hearing a lot of that lately.
It's an issue that has to be addressed.
Yeah.
It really does. You know, I don't take affront by it. Why would I? You know, my identity is intact. You see, and for those individuals where that is not the case, let's have a conversation. Let's talk and find out why.
Yeah, you know, the problem today, Mike, there's a group of society, I'm not going to label and name them, that get offended when men like us want to tell men how to be men.
Yes.
It's like that's offensive.
It is.
It should be complimentary because
Yes.
if men are men, that group of people are going to be treated better.
Yes.
Not worse, but better.
And
but somehow they've got it reversed.
And it's not complex.
No.
It really isn't. It's very simple. You know, if you can start with the foundation of love and what that means as a man,
Yeah.
you see, and the authenticity associated with that, you know, one's sense of ethics, you know, call it a code if you will. There's nothing wrong with that. Put whatever label you want to on it, as long as you understand that what we're really talking about here is self-efficacy. You see, I look every day. I'll sit here today and talking to you and I'll say, wow, I like that about Michael. I'm going to take that in, I'm going to make it my own, and I'm going to emulate that. I don't hesitate to do that. Why would I?
I agree.
Especially if it makes me not only a better man, but a better human being. And that's what we're talking about, is our humanity.
I agree. You know, and the Bible tells us, you know, love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Yes.
And that's not a narcissistic love.
No,
that's just a respect of yourself as a human being, and you share that with others.
Yes.
Let me ask you this, Mike. How are you received now? You're obviously out there quite a bit, and like I said, I'm not, you know, throwing bouquets, but you're obviously very well spoken, very intelligent, very well learned. How are people receiving the message, receiving your experience and what you've been through?
I think 99% positive.
Good.
You know, you always have that 1% that are going to take issue for whatever reason. And again, I don't mind. I believe in freedom of speech. And if there's a problem, it's their problem, not my problem. That's really what it comes down to. But I'm excited about the opportunity. You know, I understand people want to hear war stories and everything else, and I don't have a problem telling stories if you can draw a parallel with that that has not only a reference point, but value toward their understanding of what I'm talking about. I'm not advocating violence. I'm not going to glorify violence. You know, I made a very stupid statement once in an interview with New Yorker magazine. I said, you know, I deplore violence, but I'm very good at it. No, that was true. Nonetheless, it was a stupid thing to say. You see, because it can be taken out of context.
It was received wrong, yeah.
Yes, it can be received wrong. And that's what I don't want. You see, I encourage people to ask questions, you know, about what it's like in prison. You know, if they want to know what it's like to be in a knife fight, I don't have a problem telling them about that. Because hopefully that's something they'll never have to experience. You know, it's not a good thing, but I teach. I'm getting ready to do an exhibition relative to my style of fighting, but I'm primarily interested in women learning how to defend themselves.
Today is so important.
It's a huge concern of mine. You see, we unfortunately live in a predacious society. And I want my wife, and all women for that matter, to be able to protect themselves so that they're not victimized by predators.
I agree. There's a fellow by the name of Andrew Tate. You know who that is?
Yes.
Yeah, big influencer and somebody I know. And, you know, he's got a similar message. He wants men to be men. And, you know, he was ostracized for it, but I think he was accepted more from people. Yes. But he was disagreeing with women trying to defend themselves because he saw them physically as the weaker sex, not emotionally or anything else, but physically. And he said women shouldn't try to defend themselves because it's not going to work. And I disagree, because if a woman can defend herself, not everybody on the street that would approach them knows how to fight.
Right.
And if you have a little bit more of a skill in that regard, you can help yourself a lot. But I agree with you.
The idea is preparedness.
Yeah.
You see, if they're prepared for something, some catastrophic event,
yeah,
then they're better able to deal with that once confronted with it.
Right.
And that's really what we're talking about here. Now, my wife is 4'10", you see. I'm no longer 6'4". I think I've dropped a half an inch. But let me tell you something. You know, there's no doubt in my mind that if she wanted to, she could put me down.
Well, that's good.
Yes, it is.
That's a good thing.
You see, but it goes beyond that. It's taking other means. You know, being aware of your environment. You know, not being.
That's so important.
It is not being hyper vigilant, but being vigilant.
Yeah.
You know, about your environment. There's a certain, I think, naivete on the part of society in general, you know, when it comes to violence. And you think, well, we're only going to encounter violence when we go into certain neighborhoods.
Not
true.
anymore.
Not true.
But I will tell you this, something that you don't need to know, but I will tell you. You've been given a platform. When you've been there and you've done that, you speak from experience, people listen. Because obviously you have that experience, you've been through it. It's more so than if a teacher is trying to teach you something that they've never experienced. And I find that way when I go into prison and I talk to some of these gangbangers and I tell them, listen, don't tell me you can't leave a gang. I left the biggest gang in the world.
Yeah.
There's a way to do that,
Yes.
you know? So I just want to encourage you, just keep doing what you're doing. And
Thank you, Michael.
because you've got a great platform, you've got a great message. You're obviously, again, I said it for the third time, very intelligent.
Thank you.
And you're using it the right way. And I mean that.
Well, I hope you don't mind that I'm going to emulate you. I mean, I do watch your podcasts. I do watch your conversations. I like your thinking. I like your approach to the subject matter that you talk about. And I'm going to emulate that. You know, I'm going to take that and have taken that And I'm going to use that myself toward my own success in getting that message out there, because I like what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that, and I have no doubt that you'll have success in that regard. I really mean that. And hey, we just do what I do. You know, in my case, I always believe that to those who have been given much, much is expected in return. And through all the, you know, challenges that we've had through our life, I happen to be pretty blessed. And when people can see that and want to use it for their benefit, it's the best thing that you could experience.
This is what really I do know about myself. I am a servant. Mm-hmm. And that's my sole focus, is to be a servant, to be of service to others in some capacity. My wife tells me all the time, you did 45 years in prison for something you didn't do. Nonetheless, you did 45 years in prison. Let's use that experience towards the service of others.
Right on. There you have it, Mike Thompson. Very, very interesting conversation that we had. And, you know, you get a sense of people. I think he's very sincere. And I really do believe that he wants to use his experiences, 45 years in prison, been in the Aryan Brotherhood, all the things that he experienced. I could have talked to him for 10 hours. I'm sure he has that much to tell, but I got a good sense about him, and I think he really wants to use those experiences to help him. Ladies, you see the impact his wife had on him, the impact my wife had on me. It's amazing. I always say, what would we do without these good women behind us? So I applaud his wife for that. But he's starting a podcast. I advise you to tune in. You're going to hear some stories. I think that'll be entertaining, but most of all, there'll be a good message, because he really has a heart to do good for people. And to come out of prison after 45 years, experience everything that he's experienced, and come out intelligent with his emotions intact, that's really an accomplishment. So give him a shot. You know, Mike Thompson, and watch for his podcast. So that's it for today. How do I always leave you? Same way. Be safe. You heard what Mike said. Ladies, always be aware of your surroundings. Very, very important today. Be healthy. I got into that in the beginning of this video. You know how I feel. God bless every one of you. I mean that. And thank you all for supporting me on YouTube. Appreciate it very much. Be safe. Be healthy. God bless you all. And yes, I'll see you next time. Take care.